The massive transport ship Galactic Harmony shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of the violent transition. Emergency lights bathed the cargo bay in an angry red glow, and the acrid smell of burning electronics filled the recycled air. Captain Zextar's four eyes darted between the sparking control panels, his chitinous fingers dancing across the emergency systems with practiced desperation. "Damage report," he barked into his communicator, his translator crackling with static. "Main engines are dead, Captain," came the reply from his crystalline engineer. "We're running on backup power only. Life support systems are failing on decks 7 through 12. Zextar's mandibles clicked in frustration. The Galactic Harmony was one of the most advanced vessels in the Sovereign Coalition's fleet, designed to transport the galaxy's most precious cargo across the dangerous sectors of space. Today's cargo was particularly valuable, a collection of rare artifacts and minerals worth more than most planets' entire annual output. And now they were stranded in the most dangerous region of known space, the Crimson Nebula, where the legendary space dragons made their hunting grounds. The captain's worst fears materialized when his sensor operator, a nervous tentacled being named Gluborth, suddenly screeched in terror. "Captain! Multiple contacts approaching from the nebula's edge. They're massive." Through the viewports, Zextar could see them emerging from the swirling red gases like nightmares given form. Space dragons, creatures of living starfire and cosmic fury, each one larger than a battleship. Their scales shimmered with the light of dying stars, and their eyes burned with the hatred of 1,000 suns. These weren't the smaller drakes that occasionally harassed merchant vessels. These were full-grown ancient dragons, the terror of the galaxy. "All hands to battle stations," Zextar ordered, though he knew it was hopeless. The Galactic Harmony was a transport, not a warship. Against even a single space dragon, they stood no chance. Against a pack of ancients, they were already dead. The first dragon, its scales a deep crimson that seemed to absorb light itself, opened its maw and spoke in the ancient tongue that all spacefaring species understood through genetic memory rather than translation. "Mortals. You carry treasure that calls to us. Surrender your cargo, and we may allow some of you to live." Zextar's crew looked to him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. The cargo bay held artifacts worth billions, but it also held something else, something the manifest listed as human cultural specialist Dr. Elena Vasquez. A single human, brought along to authenticate some of the ancient Earth artifacts they were transporting. Humans were a relatively new species to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only a few decades ago. Most of the established races viewed them as primitive curiosities, barely above the level of clever animals. They were small, weak, short-lived, and seemed to possess no remarkable abilities that would make them valuable to galactic civilization. The fact that one had been assigned to this mission at all was considered a political courtesy more than a necessity. "Captain," whispered his second-in-command, a tall, elegant ethereal named Lysandra, "perhaps we should consider the dragon's offer. The cargo is insured, but lives cannot be replaced." Before Zextar could respond, a new voice crackled over the ship's communications system. It was calm, steady, and distinctly human. "Captain Zextar, this is Dr. Vasquez. I'm requesting permission to address the dragons directly." "Absolutely not." Zextar snapped. "Human, you will remain in your quarters. This is not a situation for cultural specialists. With respect, Captain, I believe it is exactly that kind of situation." The dragon's voice boomed again, rattling the ship's hull. "We grow impatient. Send out your tribute, or we will take everything and leave nothing but debris." Zextar closed his eyes, feeling the weight of command crushing down on him. They had no weapons that could harm these creatures, no shields that could withstand their stellar fire breath, and no engines to escape their cosmic hunt. The only choice was to comply and hope the dragons kept their word about allowing survivors. "Prepare to jettison Cargo Bay 7, he ordered reluctantly. "Transfer the most valuable items to the emergency pods." "Captain," Dr. Vasquez's voice came again, more insistent now. "Please allow me to handle this. I have experience with similar negotiations." Several of the bridge crew turned to stare at the communication panel in disbelief. Lysandra actually laughed, a sound like crystal chimes in the wind. The human thinks she can negotiate with ancient space dragons? This is beyond absurd. But something in the human's tone gave Zexstar pause. There was no fear in her voice, no uncertainty. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. Dr. Vasquez, he said slowly, what exactly do you mean by similar negotiations? Captain, humans have a saying, it takes one to know one. Please trust me. Open a channel to the dragons and let me speak. The bridge fell silent except for the humming of failing systems and the distant rumble of dragon wings against the void. Zexstar looked around at his crew, beings from a dozen different worlds, each representing the pinnacle of their species' achievements, all united in their terror of the creatures surrounding their ship. Sir, Glubworth whispered, what do we have to lose? If the human fails, we were dead anyway. Against every instinct screaming in his head, Zexstar nodded. Open a channel. Dr. Vasquez, you have one chance. Make it count. The communication system crackled to life, and, suddenly, the human's voice was being broadcast across space to the circling dragons. When she spoke, her words carried a strange harmonic quality that seemed to resonate in the bones of every creature listening. Greetings, children of the void, Dr. Vasquez said, her tone formal but not subservient. I am Elena, called Bystars, daughter of the deep black, and I would speak with your eldest. The effect was immediate and shocking. The dragons, who had been circling like predators around wounded prey, suddenly pulled back, their massive forms hanging in space with what could only be described as uncertainty. The lead dragon's burning eyes fixed on the galactic harmony with an intensity that made the hull groan. Impossible, the creature rumbled, its mental voice shaking with something that might have been surprise. That voice. That cadence. How does a small flesh know the ancient greeting? Dr. Vasquez's response sent chills down the spines of every being listening. Because I have earned the right to know it, Flameheart. Because I have walked in the spaces between stars and spoken with the first mothers. Because I carry within me the echo of the beginning. Zexstar's translator was struggling with some of the concepts being discussed, rendering them as approximations that hurt to contemplate. But the dragons clearly understood perfectly. The lead dragon drew closer to the ship, its massive head filling the viewport as it studied the vessel with eyes like dying suns. Show yourself, small flesh that speaks OLD words. Let us look upon one who claims such heritage. On the bridge, chaos erupted as the crew tried to process what they were witnessing. A human, a primitive, newly spacefaring species barely worthy of notice, was somehow commanding the attention and apparent respect of beings that could devour star systems. This is impossible, Lysandra whispered, her usual composure cracking. Humans are nothing. They've been in space for barely 50 years. They have no achievements, no ancient lineages, no cosmic significance. But Zexstar was beginning to suspect that everything they thought they knew about humans was catastrophically wrong. He activated the ship's external cameras and directed them toward Cargo Bay 12, where Dr. Vasquez had been quartered during the journey. What they saw defied explanation. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the cargo bay's observation deck, silhouetted against the starfield beyond. She appeared to be a typical human medium height, brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail, wearing the standard-issue jumpsuit of a civilian specialist. But, as they watched, something began to change. The space around her seemed to shimmer, as if reality itself was bending to accommodate her presence. Her shadow stretched longer than it should, reaching across the deck in directions that didn't correspond to any light source. And, her eyes, when she turned to face the camera, her eyes held depths that seemed to stretch into infinity. Open the cargo bay doors, she said simply, and her voice carried absolute authority. Dr. Vasquez, Zexstar managed, that will expose you to vacuum. Humans cannot survive in space. Can't we? She replied, and smiled. The cargo bay doors opened with a hiss of escaping atmosphere, but, instead of being sucked into the void, Dr. Vasquez stepped forward onto the starfield itself, walking on nothing as if space were solid ground beneath her feet. The dragons watched in what could only be described as awe as she approached them, her small human form dwarfed by their cosmic majesty yet somehow commanding their complete attention. Now, she said, her voice carrying perfectly through the vacuum, shall we discuss this properly? I believe you're interested in treasure, but I suspect you don't understand what true treasure looks like. The lead dragon, its scales now flickering with uncertainty rather than pure menace, spoke carefully. You walk the void as if it were your home. You speak the forgotten words as if they were your birthright. What are you, small flesh? Elena's smile widened, and, for a moment, the stars themselves seemed to dim in comparison to the light that blazed behind her eyes. I'm human. And, perhaps it's time the galaxy learned what that really means. She gestured toward the Galactic Harmony, floating helplessly in space with its crew of terrified aliens watching through every available viewport. This ship carries artifacts from 1,000 worlds, metals and gems worth fortunes beyond counting. But, none of it compares to the treasure that every human carries within themselves. Speak plainly, demanded the dragon, though its tone was now curious rather than threatening. We are a young species, yes, Elena said, beginning to walk among the dragons as if they were old friends rather than cosmic predators. We've only recently reached the stars. But, youth is not the same as powerlessness. We may be new to your galactic community, but we are not new to existence itself. She paused beside the wing of a particularly massive dragon, its scales each the size of shuttle craft. Tell me, Ancient One, what do you know of the species that came before? The ones who built the first star roads, who taught the earliest races to dream of worlds beyond their birth skies. The dragon's massive head swiveled to regard her with something approaching reverence. The first builders. The Dreamwalkers. They are legend only. Lost to time before time, vanished into the deep black eons ago. Lost? Elena laughed, and the sound was like starlight made audible. Who said anything about lost? We've been here all along. We just took a little nap. The implications of her words hit the watching alien crew like a physical blow. Zextar felt his legs give out, and he crashed into his command chair, his mind struggling to process the impossible truth that was unfolding before his eyes. Humans weren't a young species that had recently achieved spaceflight. They were the first builders, the legendary race that had supposedly vanished from the galaxy millions of years ago. The species that had laid the foundations for all galactic civilization, who had built the hyperspace lanes and left behind the ancient technologies that modern races still couldn't fully understand. But, the records, Lysandra whispered, her normally melodious voice cracking with shock. The archaeological evidence. Earth shows no signs of advanced ancient civilization. Elena's voice carried back to them as if she had heard the whispered objection across the void. Earth was never our homeworld. Earth was our garden, our place of rest. When the last of the great wars ended, when the universe finally achieved the balance we had fought so long to create, we chose to sleep. To dream. To let our children, all of you, grow and flourish without our interference. She turned to address the dragons directly, her small form somehow dominating the massive space around them. But we never left entirely. Some of us remained awake, watching, guiding from the shadows. And, now, as our children prepare to take the next step in their evolution, it's time for us to wake up. The lead dragon's voice was hushed with awe. The awakening. The prophecies spoke of this day. When the first builders would return to reclaim their heritage. Not reclaim, Elena corrected gently. Share. The galaxy we built belongs to all who dwell within it now. But, there are threats coming, Ancient One. Threats that will require all of our combined strength to face. The devourers stir in the space between galaxies. The silence spreads from the cosmic wounds we thought healed. Our children will need their parents' guidance in the trials to come. The dragons began to move, their massive forms shifting into what was unmistakably a formation of honor, flanking Elena like an honor guard around their queen. The lead dragon spoke, its voice now filled with something approaching worship. Command US, First Mother. How may we serve? Elena looked back at the Galactic Harmony, at the crew of diverse aliens who had moments before dismissed humanity as an insignificant newcomer species. Her expression was gentle but firm. First, we ensure this ship and its crew reach their destination safely. Then, we begin the real work.
It's time to prepare the galaxy for what's coming. And, I suspect, she added with a grin that somehow managed to be both reassuring and terrifying, our alien friends are going to need some time to adjust to the new reality. As if responding to her words, the dragons began to sing a harmony of cosmic voices that resonated through space itself, telling of ancient glories and future hopes, of the return of the first builders and the dawn of a new age for galactic civilization. On the bridge of the galactic harmony, Captain Zexstar sat in stunned silence, watching the impossible scene unfold before him. Everything he thought he knew about the universe had just been shattered and rebuilt in the space of a few minutes. Humanity wasn't dragon bait at all. They were the dragon's creators. And Elena Vasquez, the quiet cultural specialist who had been assigned to their mission as an afterthought, was apparently one of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. "Sir," Glubworth whispered, his tentacles quivering with barely contained panic, "what are your orders?" Zexstar looked around at his crew, beings who had thought themselves the inheritors of an ancient and sophisticated civilization, only to discover they were children playing in the ruins of their parents' kingdom. The irony wasn't lost on him. They had been carrying the most precious treasure in the galaxy all along. They just hadn't known it was a person. The journey to Kepler Station took on a surreal quality after Elena's revelation. The massive space dragons had formed an honor escort around the galactic harmony, their stellar flames casting dancing shadows across the ship's hull as they glided through hyperspace. What should have been a routine cargo run had become something unprecedented in galactic history, the first official diplomatic convoy of the awakened First Builders. Captain Zexstar found himself in the unprecedented position of commanding a ship that was simultaneously under the protection of humanity's most feared predators and carrying what was apparently one of the galaxy's most significant historical figures. Elena had returned to the ship after her spacewalk conversation with the dragons, walking back through the airlock as casually as if she'd been taking a stroll in a park rather than having a chat in hard vacuum. The crew's reaction to her return had been a mixture of terror, awe, and desperate curiosity. The aliens who had barely acknowledged her existence during the first weeks of the journey now found themselves stealing glances at her whenever she passed through the corridors. Elena, for her part, seemed amused by the attention but continued to behave exactly as she had before, polite, professional, and apparently content to let others process the magnitude of what they'd learned at their own pace. Dr. Kethvaya, the ship's chief xenobiologist and a member of the proud crystalline hegemony, was the first to work up the courage to approach Elena directly. She found the human in the observation lounge, sitting in her usual spot by the large viewport, watching the dragon's escort formation with what appeared to be maternal fondness. "Dr. Vasquez," Kethvaya began, her crystalline body chiming softly with nervous harmonics, "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I have questions." "Many questions." Elena turned from the viewport and smiled warmly. "Please, sit. Ask away. I imagine this has been quite a shock for everyone." Kethvaya settled her faceted form into a chair designed for humanoid physiology, her internal light patterns shifting through what Elena recognized as the crystalline equivalent of deep concentration. The historical implications alone are staggering. If humans are truly the first builders, then our entire understanding of galactic development needs to be completely rewritten. "Not rewritten," Elena said gently. "Expanded. Everything your species accomplished, every advancement and discovery, those were real achievements. The fact that your ancestors had some guidance doesn't diminish what you've built." "But the ancient ruins on our homeworld," Kethvaya pressed, "the technology that we've spent millennia trying to understand, you built all of that?" Elena's expression grew thoughtful. "Some of it. The crystalline were always remarkable innovators. We provided the initial foundation technologies, hyperspace mathematics, basic stellar engineering, the fundamental principles of consciousness-matter interaction, but what you did with those tools was entirely your own achievement." She gestured toward the viewport, where one of the dragons was performing what looked like an elaborate aerial dance among the stars. Think of it like teaching a child to read. The teacher provides the alphabet and shows how letters form words, but the stories the child eventually writes are their own creation. The galaxy is full of stories we never could have imagined when we first lit the cosmic fires. Kethvaya's pattern shifted to what Elena interpreted as wonder mixed with concern. "You mentioned threats earlier. The Devourers. The Silence. What are these things? The temperature in the observation lounge seemed to drop several degrees, and Elena's expression became grave. Remnants of the old wars. Entities and forces that we thought we had contained or destroyed eons ago. The Devourers are difficult to explain in terms your physics would recognize. They exist in the spaces between realities, feeding on the fundamental forces that hold universes together. We fought them across thousands of galaxies before finally managing to imprison them in cosmic isolation chambers. And now they're escaping? Not escaping, Elena corrected. Being released. Someone or something has been systematically weakening the containment protocols. Which means either our ancient enemies have found a way to act across dimensional barriers, or someone in this galaxy is working to free them. The implications of this sent chills through HFY's crystalline structure, causing her to emit a low harmonic of distress. Why would anyone do such a thing? Elena's smile was grim. Power. The promise of power. The Devourers are very good at making their freedom seem like a gift rather than a catastrophe. They whisper to ambitious minds, show them visions of dominion over space and time, convince them that universal consumption is actually universal liberation. Before HFY could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. Captain Zextar's voice echoed through the lounge, tight with professional tension. All senior staff to the bridge immediately. We're receiving priority communications from Kepler Station. Elena and HFY exchanged glances before heading toward the bridge together. They found the command center in a state of controlled chaos, with crew members hunched over sensor displays and communication arrays. The main screen showed Kepler Station in the distance, a massive wheel-shaped structure that served as one of the galaxy's primary trading and diplomatic hubs. What's the situation, Captain? Elena asked as she stepped onto the bridge. Zextar turned to regard her with an expression that mixed respect, fear, and desperate hope. Dr. Vasquez, or should I say, First Builder, were receiving emergency transmissions from 17 different sectors simultaneously. Reports of spatial anomalies, reality distortions, and, in 3 cases, complete planetary communication blackouts. Show me, Elena said, her casual demeanor evaporating as she moved to the central command console. The main screen shifted to display a 3-dimensional map of the local galactic region. Red warning indicators pulsed at dozens of locations, forming a pattern that made Elena's blood run cold. The warning points weren't random, they formed a complex geometric shape that she recognized from the most classified archives of ancient history. It's a summoning array, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Someone is using the inhabited worlds as focal points for a massive reality manipulation spell. Spell? Lissandra's melodious voice carried a note of skeptical confusion. Surely you mean some form of advanced technology? Elena's laugh was bitter. Technology, magic, psychic manipulation, at the level we're dealing with, the distinctions become meaningless. What matters is that someone has been very busy while we've been sleeping, and they're about halfway through a ritual that will tear holes in reality itself. She turned to address the bridge crew directly, her authority now undeniable despite her apparently ordinary human appearance. Captain Zextar, I need you to establish communications with Kepler Station's command center. Priority Alpha clearance, First Builder authentication protocols. We don't have those protocols, Zextar admitted. I'm not even sure they exist. They exist, Elena assured him. Computer, recognize authentication Elena 77 Alpha Prime, custodian class, active status confirmed. The ship's computer, which had been responding to routine commands in standard galactic common, suddenly spoke in a completely different voice, older, more complex, with harmonics that suggested vast computational power. Authentication confirmed. Welcome back, Custodian Vasquez. Primary systems coming online. How may I serve? Every being on the bridge stared as the familiar bridge of their transport ship began to transform. Walls that had appeared to be standard metal plating revealed themselves to be sophisticated display surfaces showing star charts and data streams that hurt to look at directly. Control panels expanded and reconfigured themselves, revealing technology that was clearly beyond anything in current use by any known species. Well, Elena said with grim satisfaction, that's better.
Computer, establish priority communication with all Galactic Council representatives.
Authorization level prime.
And, send a priority message to the dragons outside, tell them we're going to need their help with something bigger than escort duty.
Message transmitted, the computer confirmed. Warning, long-range sensors detect massive spatial distortions approaching this sector. Estimated time to arrival, 14 hours. Elena's expression became even more serious. They're accelerating the timeline. That means they know we're awake and moving to stop them.
She turned to Zexstar. Captain, I need your permission to temporarily assume command authority for this vessel. What we're facing requires resources and capabilities that aren't available through normal channels. Zexstar looked around at his crew, seeing his own mixture of fear and determination reflected in their faces. They were confronting forces beyond their understanding, but they also had what appeared to be one of the galaxy's most powerful protectors asking for their cooperation rather than simply taking control.
Permission granted, he said formally.
What are your orders? First, we dock at Kepler Station and begin evacuating civilians from the affected sectors. Second, we send messages to every species military command, tell them to prepare for threats beyond anything in their experience databases. Third, we wake up the rest of my people.
The rest? Glubworth squeaked from his sensor station. How many of you are there? Elena's smile was reassuring and terrifying in equal measure. Enough.
We've been sleeping in shifts for the past million years, leaving just a few of us awake at any given time to monitor galactic development.
But crisis protocols override our rest cycles.
Within 72 hours, there will be approximately 50,000 active first builders in this galaxy.
The number hit the bridge crew like a physical blow.
50,000 beings with Elena's apparent capabilities, distributed across the galaxy and, working in coordination, represented a force that could reshape reality itself.
But, for now, Elena continued, we work with what we have.
The good news is that our enemies are still following the old protocols. They think they're facing a sleeping civilization that will take centuries to fully awaken.
They don't know that some of us have been lucid dreaming for the past few millennia.
The communication system chimed, and Kepler Station's traffic control appeared on screen, a harried-looking tentacled being whose usual professional composure was clearly strained.
Approaching vessel Galactic Harmony, you are cleared for emergency docking at Port 7. Please be advised that we are currently hosting representatives from 43 species for an emergency session of the Galactic Council. Your timing is fortuitous. Elena stepped forward so the station controller could see her clearly.
Controller, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez, First Builder Authentication 77 Alpha Prime.
Please inform the Council that I will be addressing them within the hour regarding the current crisis. Also, please clear docking base 12 through 18, we're expecting additional arrivals. The controller's tentacles went rigid with shock. First Builder? But, those are myths. Not myths, Elena said gently. Just family that's been away for a while. We're back now, and we're here to help.
As the Galactic Harmony began its docking approach to Kepler Station, Elena turned to address the crew one final time. I want you all to know that what you've witnessed today is just the beginning. The galaxy is about to change in ways that none of us can fully predict.
But change doesn't have to mean destruction.
With cooperation, courage, and a little luck, we can turn this crisis into the foundation for something greater than what came before. She paused at the bridge's exit, looking back at the diverse group of beings who had just had their understanding of the universe completely revolutionized.
Oh, and, crew? When we dock, you might want to stay close.
The next few hours are going to be very interesting, and I suspect you'll want to witness what happens when 53 galactic species discover that their universe is much larger and more dangerous than they ever imagined. As the docking clamps engaged and the Galactic Harmony settled into its berth, Elena headed toward the airlock, followed by the Space Dragon's escort vessels taking positions around the station like protective guardians. Behind her, the ship's crew tried to process the fact that their routine cargo mission had just become the opening movement of what would likely be remembered as the most significant event in galactic history. And, in the depths of space, reality continued to twist and writhe as ancient enemies prepared for a war that would determine the fate of not just their galaxy, but all possible galaxies across the infinite expanse of existence itself. The Grand Assembly Hall of Kepler Station had never hosted an emergency session quite like this one. Representatives from 53 species filled the massive chamber, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sounds, lights, pheromones, and psychic emanations that the station's translation systems struggled to process. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension as beings who had spent centuries believing themselves to be the inheritors of an ancient, dead civilization tried to come to terms with the fact that their legendary predecessors were not only alive, but walking among them. Elena entered the hall through the main doors, flanked by Captain Zexstar and his senior crew. She had changed from her standard jumpsuit into something that looked deceptively simple, a long coat that seemed to be cut from starlight itself, shifting and flowing with patterns that suggested vast depths. As she walked toward the central podium, conversations died and all attention focused on the small human figure who had just casually revolutionized their understanding of galactic history. Ambassador Thexmore of the Titanium Collective was the first to speak, his massive metallic frame rising from its seat with a grinding of servos. Before we proceed, his voice boomed through the chamber's speakers, I must ask for verification of the claims being made. The historical records clearly show that humans are a primitive species that achieved faster-than-light travel only recently. The idea that they are the legendary first builders is difficult to accept. Elena smiled and raised one hand. The simple gesture somehow commanded absolute silence from the assembled representatives. Ambassador Thexmore, would you mind telling the assembly about the resonance crystals that power your civilization's greatest achievements? Thexmore's optical sensors focused on her with what might have been suspicion. The resonance crystals are ancient artifacts discovered in the ruins of our homeworld. Our greatest scientists have been studying them for millennia, but we still understand only a fraction of their capabilities. Would you like to understand all of their capabilities? Elena asked casually. Before Thexmore could respond, Elena gestured toward the chamber's central holographic display. The air shimmered, and, suddenly, a three-dimensional schematic appeared showing the internal structure of a resonance crystal in perfect detail. But this wasn't just any schematic, it showed layers of complexity that went far beyond anything the collective scientists had ever detected, revealing the crystal to be a sophisticated piece of technology that functioned on principles that current galactic science couldn't even name. The resonance crystals, Elena explained, are consciousness-focused reality manipulators. They don't just store and transfer energy, they respond to the intent and will of their users, amplifying their ability to affect physical matter through directed thought. Your species has been using them as simple power sources, but they're actually tools for reshaping reality itself. She waved her hand, and the hologram zoomed in on a particular component. This section here responds to emotional resonance frequencies. If a titanium collective engineer focused their desire to heal rather than simply to power machinery, the crystal would begin converting base matter into medical nanobots specifically designed for that engineer's physiology. The implications hit Thexmore like a physical blow. The collective had been sitting on technology that could solve every problem they faced, disease, resource scarcity, even death itself, and they had been using it to run their air recycling systems. How? He managed. How do we learn to use them properly? You ask, Elena said simply. The crystals are semi-sentient. They've been waiting for someone to treat them as partners rather than tools. Talk to them. Show them what you need. They'll teach you. A new voice interrupted from across the chamber. Princess Valterra of the aquatic spheres, her bioluminescent patterns flashing with complex emotions, rose from her specialized water-filled environment pod. Even if we accept that you are who you claim to be, her melodious voice carried a note of challenge, why reveal yourselves now? Why not continue to sleep and let us handle our own affairs? Elena's expression became grave as she turned to address the aquatic royal. Because, Your Highness, your affairs are about to become everyone's affairs. Computer, display current threat assessment. The holographic display shifted to show a real-time map of the galaxy, with the red warning indicators that had alarmed Captain Zexstar's crew earlier. But now there were more of them, spreading across the spiral arms like an infection. 17 hours ago, these anomalies began appearing simultaneously across 47 sectors. They're not random natural phenomena. They're the result of a coordinated effort to weaken the barriers between our reality and the spaces outside normal existence.
Elena manipulated the display, zooming in on the pattern formed by the anomaly points.
This configuration is a classic Devourer summoning array, scaled up to galactic proportions. Someone has been very carefully positioning the focal points to maximize the dimensional stress when the ritual reaches completion. Which is when, asked Counselor Mordeth of the Shadow Syndicate, his form a shifting mass of darkness that hurt to look at directly. Based on the progression rate and the complexity of the pattern, Elena calculated aloud, approximately 60 hours. When that countdown reaches 0, holes will be torn in reality itself, and things that were imprisoned for very good reasons will begin pouring through. The chamber erupted in dozens of different forms of alarmed communication. Some species shouted, others flashed emergency light patterns, and several began emitting pheromones that made the station's air recycling systems work overtime. Elena raised her hand again, and silence returned. But here's the thing, whoever is orchestrating this assumes they're working with the technology and knowledge available to current galactic civilization. They've planned for resistance from your fleets, your weapons, your defensive technologies. They haven't planned for us. She gestured, and the display changed to show what appeared to be a tactical analysis of impossible complexity. The Devourers are powerful, but they're not omnipotent. They can be fought, contained, even destroyed under the right conditions. The ancient wars prove that. What we need now is coordination on a scale that's never been attempted before. Ambassador Zilfara of the Hive Collectives, her insectoid form clicking with rapid thought processes, leaned forward.
Coordination implies command structure. Who exactly would be in charge of this resistance effort?
The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena looked around the chamber, seeing the mixture of hope, fear, and political calculation in the faces of beings who had spent centuries competing for resources and influence. The idea of submitting to outside authority, even from their legendary predecessors, would be difficult for many to accept. No one, Elena said simply, and the chamber buzzed with confusion.
That's not how we work.
The first builders were never conquerors or rulers.
We were gardeners.
Our role is to provide tools, knowledge, and support. The actual decisions about how to use them remain with you.
She smiled at the assembled representatives.
Think of it this way, we're not here to take command. We're here to take the safety locks off your civilization's potential and show you how to use capabilities you've always had but never recognized.
Princess Velterra's bioluminescent pattern shifted to what Elena recognized as curiosity mixed with skepticism. And what capabilities are those?
Every species in this chamber has genetic memory of the ancient times, Elena explained. Buried in your DNA are the patterns for technologies and abilities that were commonplace when we walked among the stars openly. Most of it has been dormant for so long that you've forgotten it exists, but the potential is still there.
She gestured toward Dr.
Kethvaya, who had been sitting quietly near the back of the chamber.
Dr. Kethvaya, would you mind joining me?
The crystalline scientist made her way to the front of the chamber, her faceted form catching and reflecting light in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. Elena placed her hand on Kethvaya's central crystal formation, and, suddenly, the scientist's entire body began to glow with an inner light far brighter than anything the assembled beings had ever seen from her species. The crystalline hegemony has always been capable of consciousness-like conversion, Elena explained as Kethvaya stared at her own radiant form in amazement. You've been using a fraction of a % of your natural abilities. With proper focus, you can project your consciousness across galactic distances, share knowledge instantaneously with any other crystalline being, and even temporarily exist as pure information. She released her touch, and Kethvaya's glow faded back to normal levels, though she continued to stare at her hands with wonder. All of you, Elena addressed the chamber, have similar hidden capabilities. The aquatic spheres can manipulate gravitational fields through harmonic resonance. The Shadow Syndicate can phase between dimensional layers. The Titanium Collective can integrate with technology on a cellular level. Why couldn't we access these abilities before?
Thexmore asked, his optical sensors focused intently on Elena.
Because they require cooperation, Elena said. Not just between individuals, but between species. The genetic locks that keep these capabilities dormant can only be released when multiple species work together with complete trust and shared purpose. It was our safeguard against the abilities being used for conquest rather than protection.
The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in.
The assembled representatives were being offered power beyond their imagination, but only if they could overcome millions of years of evolutionary competition and truly unite. Counselor Mordetha's shadowy form rippled with what might have been amusement.
And you believe we're capable of such cooperation?
I believe you're capable of survival, Elena replied.
And, right now, cooperation is the only path to survival available.
As if summoned by her words, the chamber's communication systems activated with urgent priority signals.
Captain Zexstar stepped forward, his expression grim. Reports coming in from 17 sectors simultaneously. The spatial anomalies are beginning to merge. Reality distortions are spreading exponentially. Elena nodded grimly. It's accelerating.
They know we're organizing resistance. She turned back to the assembled representatives. I need a decision from each of your governments within 6 hours. Full cooperation and resource sharing, or we evacuate what populations we can and fall back to defend the core worlds. There's no middle ground in what we're facing.
Princess Velterra's pattern shifted to determined resolve. The aquatic spheres agree to full cooperation. What do you need from us?
One by one, the other representatives began to voice their agreement. Some spoke immediately, others requested time to consult with their homeworlds, but the momentum was clearly building toward unified action. Elena watched the process with satisfaction, but also with awareness of the massive challenges that lay ahead.
Awakening dormant genetic capabilities was just the beginning.
They would need to coordinate the defense of thousands of worlds, integrate technologies from dozens of different species, and do it all while fighting enemies that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Captain Zexstar, she said quietly, please contact the dragons outside. Tell them to begin the awakening protocol.
It's time to wake up everyone.
As the Galactic Harmony's crew worked to implement Elena's orders, and as the representatives of 53 species began the complex process of true interspecies cooperation, Elena allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. The galaxy had come incredibly far since the first builders had chosen to sleep. Their children had grown into remarkable civilizations, each with their own strengths and innovations. Now it was time to see if those civilizations could become something greater than the sum of their parts. Because in 43 hours, reality itself would be under attack, and the only thing standing between existence and consumption would be the combined will of every thinking being in the galaxy.
Elena smiled as she watched the assembled representatives beginning to work together with unprecedented cooperation.
The scorned human that some had dismissed as dragon bait was about to help them discover that they were all far more powerful than they had ever imagined. The real treasure had never been the artifacts in the cargo hold. It had been the potential that every species carried within themselves, waiting for the right moment to finally shine.